the whole theme of today's webinar is Detroit pizza, a fad or a trend that's here to stay. We see it as a trend at the moment. We're seeing a lot of potential customers and hospitality operators, restaurants, pizzerias are inquiring about Detroit pizza. It's definitely making some waves in sort of Instagram and TikTok scene. But we just want to drill down and distill a little bit. The question is it a sort of trend that's a blip, or is it something that's going to have place in UK pizza market for a little bit longer? So first things first, it's me. My name is Bart. I run a NPD and bakery consultancy called The Balcony View. I've been in the industry for more than I would like to admit, but I've got a sort of breadth of experience focusing on pizza products and Italian arts and bakery. I'm working with Sturdy Foods with James and Karen, and the theme of our cooperation is to enable Sturdy Foods to manufacture products that in turn support business in the hospitality business in this tough time, increasing profits, putting more bums on seats, and actually delivering innovation that solves quite a lot of current hospitality problems. Hence, you're going to be hearing quite a lot from us about innovative trends, niche pizza styles, or sort of um, exciting applications of a product that could be cross used and just used in a different manner that's going to reduce your waste and improve your menu options. So pizza is one of the nation's and world favorites food. Around 5.7 million people in the UK eat pizza 2 3 times a month. We have a sort of pizza revolution going on. For me, it looks a little bit like craft beer boom of last decade, where we had lager, we had ale, we had bitter, and suddenly all those trends from America turned up and stirred up the market a little bit. So we having a bit of um, sort of different setups popping out. We have slice shops, we have pop-ups, we have street foods, we have a sort of takeaway concepts that may be different from a sit-down restaurant. And Detroit is part of that movement and is part of that sort of new wave of pizza innovation. The history of Detroit pizza is really fascinating. It originated in Detroit, the Motor City, in 1946, and the key is the we're looking at the Italian immigrant population who's working in the motor industry. Um, there's a style of pizza called grandma in America, which is derived from Sicilian pizza style, which is a square pizza baked in a tin. Um, Detroit is a sort of take on the grandma Sicilian pizza style, and the legend says that one of the grandmothers that was brought over from Italy one day took a blue steel tin that's usually used in Motor City to wash and carry nuts and bolts and tools around the factory, and pressed some pizza dough, used then cheese first, as the dough was so super thick that when sauce was used first, it created sort of the gum line and a little bit of a sticky and soggy top. So the cheese was used first, and then the sauce on top. Um, the reason why um, the dough can be stretched to a round pizza is sort of similar to what happened in New York with the long maturation of the dough. Traditionally, flour in North of America is probably strongest in the world. We're talking red winter grist. We're talking a flour that's pulling back quite and slapping back quite ferociously, meaning that it's really difficult to open a pizza. And Italians, post-war, we didn't have the migration of trends and cultures and flour styles. They were traditionally used to soft, extensible wheat, um, sort of native to Italy. Um, they had to adapt. They had to adapt the style, and they had to adapt the baking techniques to address the fact that the dough was super strong. Hence, pushed in a tin, long maturation times to relax the dough, And that's how Detroit pizza was born. The way it's made is quite different to anything that you would see in a regular sort of pizza scene in the UK at the moment. First, it uses a blue steel tin. It's a special type of tin that is sort of conducting heat very, very well and enables the dough to be matured without sticking in it for anywhere up to 48 hours. So we have quite a large dough ball that we press into the tin, that we leave in that tin for 24 to 48 hours to relax. And during that process, the crust will open up and the flavor will develop. Now, with the dough sort of resembles more bread dough, and it's a little bit of crossover between bread and pizza dough. Now, together with Sturdy Foods, we've developed a dough that's based on Italian, so it's got that Italian provenance. It has a very, very typical traditional Italian pre-ferment called biga, which is a dry pre-ferment, really focusing on building the structure of the dough and giving it robustness. Um, we use Canadian flour and we use a North American grist. Hence, we can replicate um, all the most prominent features of Detroit pizza in a frozen dough setting, which is quite important because there's quite a large batch sizes needed for that pizza. Um, we'll see it later down in the videos, but that it's a dough heavy pizza, so we can offer 200 between 210 all the way to 600 gram, which gives the end user flexibility of using a very high volume of dough, which would be difficult to prepare using commercial catering mixers, and still deliver large volume of product. So um, using strong Canadian bread flour, which is giving us that robustness and that chew and that structure, not far off from focaccia, but much chewier and fragrant. The dough is then pressed in a tin um, and par baked as a way to ensure the crispy bottom and top. The reason why we par baking is that it takes around 20 to 25 minutes to fully bake that base, and we are looking and we are aiming at a full development of that crumb. Um, in a plain speak, if we were to top that pizza and put it raw dough topped, put in the oven, we would find that the toppings would be quite burned by the time the dough would develop and bake properly. So we're using two-stage baking process. We first par bake the base, and then we can store the par baked bases for up to 3 days in ambient temperature. And actually, the longer we keep them, the crispier and the more softer and chewier the base becomes. So this presents a great opportunity for hospitality operators to actually stock up on bases and actually disconnect the par baking from the immediate service. With the issues around hospitality these days, around labor, around availability of labor, and trying to make the restaurant and pizzeria operations more efficient, it actually works really well that in the quiet times, the operator can focus on utilizing the frozen dough and par baking the product, par baking the bases, then topping them and finishing. We top with the cheese first, meaning, and you'll see later in the video, we are pushing the cheese into the edge of it to create what Americans, of course, call the cheese wall, which is a caramelized outer crust formed during that second bake. That may be lower temperature, 150, 160-degree bake, that focuses on caramelizing that cheese rather than baking the dough. That sort of style of baking and the fact that we're using two-stage baking process allows the pizza to carry more heavier and more of the toppings, cold dressings and leaves, because we're looking at a more robust product that survives transport better than a regular pizza, that doesn't get soggy, doesn't get sloppy with time. So that sort of two-stage baking process, cheese first approach, allows us to create a base for real sort of creativity to thrive. Here we've got some Detroit Square pictures from my trips to New York, and I've been sort of eating Detroit pizza since, gosh, 2017, 2018. It was at first a little bit of a shocker when I came upon it, and you can see on the left-hand side Prince Street Pizza in Greenwich Village, which generates massive queues. That slice is probably enough to feed a family for a week. It's got what Americans call cupped pepperoni, which sort of curls up and creates a cup with a little bit of pork fat in it. You can see the amount of cheese is absolutely huge. And on the right hand side, you see Emmy Squared in I think it's Lower East Side, and that's a portion for one. But you can just see the caramelized wall on and around the edges, where the typical American Wisconsin brick cheese is used. It's a sort of mixture between mozzarella and cheddar, and I think in the UK we can substitute brick cheese with some mature cheddar and diced mozzarella to give both that flavor and meltability. Um, upper corner, you can see the structure of the dough. It's sort of resembling more open focaccia. It's much softer, but it's quite thick. We are talking inch and a half thickness, all the way to sometimes the Prince Street pizza on the left hand side would be about 2.5 inches thick, which is quite a portion. Here we've got a little bit more pictures. Again, on the left, you can see Mama's too, which is a lovely sort of Detroit and lemon whipped ricotta slice. Again, you can see a bottom bit a bit charred because of the double bake. In the middle, L&B, that's a very, very traditional Detroit joint in Brooklyn, which is super old fashioned. Again, super charred. And I think, we should not be afraid of the char because it gives the dough a unique flavor and actually prevents from the dough to getting a bit sloppy. On the right upper corner, this sort of illustration of how we can innovate. This is a pretty heavy pizza that I prepared many months ago for a client. It's got all sorts of tomatoes and leaves and some spicy peppers, etc. It just seems like Detroit can innovate in that direction, where we can make it really opulent, where we can serve fresh and crunchy with sort of crispy and chewy, where we can apply cold dressing like the ricotta on the left hand side, which is partially baked but it's really fresh, and we can have these sort of contradicting and contrasting flavors and textures on the same pizza. But Detroit also presents a few challenges for UK market. It's a very generous portion size, as we've seen on the previous clip. The size of the portion is sort of deceiving for European customer and American consumer being used to quite hefty portions. And in UK, we tend to recognize the size of the portion sort of horizontally. Here, Detroit is quite thick. It's quite small in our terms, but quite heavy and filling, and that sometimes may be deceiving for UK customer, where we could face people or consumers ordering too much, or have a perception of a small portion. I've heard feedback of both. The nutritional score is really not in line with UK trends at the moment. We are to achieve that cheese wall and not to have the raw dough sort of and transparent and sort of in patches, creating that very unappealing sort of patchy look, we have to use on average 2.5 times of cheese that we would for a regular margarita, and especially with Neapolitan, where the cheese the cheese ratio to sauce is quite low. It's almost in reverse. So we have to cover the bottom of the pizza, so sorry, the top of the pizza fully, whilst driving some cheese into the edges. It's expensive. It's quite heavy for a UK customer, and it's the nutritional score would put it in red in most of the categories. So the perception of portion, value for money, and the nutritionals could be challenging. But we've seen some innovation around that in UK, where businesses would take the opportunity and take the inspiration. Yes, we have quite a lot of investment in expensive pans, and they have to be cared for. But once we sort of fork out the initial amount, we are then sort of having more production line system in the pizzeria, allowing us to reduce the service times. And if we sort of constructively look at those challenges and adapt them to UK consumer, we actually might have something that is could be eaten on the go, could be eaten as a sort of a compliment in a pub, could be traveling very well in a square box. And I've seen and I've spoken to Detroit potential Detroit chains, which was quite, for example, excited about travel options on the trains and on coaches, because a square pizza sits on the lap better and it's more manageable sometimes with children and families. Potential solutions is use of lighter toppings. Again, salads, dressing, leaves, roasted vegetables, to really dilute the density, calorific density of that product. Sometimes, like with other dishes heavy on cheese, just takes a look at ready meal market in UK, lasagna, mac and cheese, and moussaka. Very often, the use of white sauce is a nice way of diluting the amount of cheese whilst allowing it to spread evenly. Um, and then again, the white sauce could carry some additional flavor profiles and additional sensations. Blend of thinly grated and diced mozzarella to retain the chew and pull, whilst reducing the overall sort of a calorific content, the fat and the salt. Reduction of base thickness. I think this is where the market is going at the moment. This is why we are offering with our frozen dough a range of weights. You could take a 240 or 210 or 240 two dough balls and roll them together, or use them quite thinly. I think that's where the market is going. That reduces the heaviness of the and the size of that portion by quite a lot. Using frozen dough to reduce prep time and utilize more assembly line production style is a key for us, because as I've mentioned, it's a quite dough heavy product. So we want to be, for the businesses to not be thinking about that additional dough preparation, that volume of dough. We want the businesses to be able to defrost the dough ball, put the dough ball in a, you can even defrost it in a tray, clean film the tray, leave the tray overnight in a chiller. In the morning, spread, and I'll show you in a minute how it's done. Spread it and push it into the tin. Again, you can rest it from 8 hours to all the way to 2 days. And par bake just ensures that we got two steps in that sort of production style assembly line. We have a frozen dough that's always consistent, always there, that's already got 48-hour pre-ferment, which is a key to develop that flavor and that robustness. And that allows the operator to just focus really on topping and dressing the product up for better um, for to entice the customer and to follow the trends. UK customization opportunities are huge, I think, for Detroit Pizza. There's so much scope to use regional toppings such as meat, seasonal vegetables. You can talk asparagus, you can talk crunchy Swede or crunchy turnip, even slightly thin. You have British condiments, you have chutneys, you have chili jams, you have onion jams. All of that fits very well with the Detroit style. The cheddar, again, UK is a universe of cheddar. We could be including some really flavoursome cheeses to really make that cheese wall or that cheese layer exciting, maybe few dimensions of flavour. The pub classics like chicken leek and steak and ale also have got their space as a topping for Detroit, and opportunities of fusion flavours. I mean, really, that sort of fusion approach to pizza sort of died out because I don't think UK consumer was really interested in having Peking duck on their pizza. But here we have a sort of fresh, clean slate approach. We could be introducing fusion flavors, Korean barbecues, gochujang chicken on it, katsu curry, breaded chicken breast. There's so many opportunities that we we would we could present to a customer without sort of offending the classical pizza styles. Before I show you the videos, if any of that sounds interesting, and we've got both stock and capability to produce samples of Detroit dough, just talk to us. Talk to Karen. I was on holidays today, but talk to me. We're always more than happy to run the businesses through the whole cycle, to the dough management, through customization opportunities, and our sort of in-house knowledge of Detroit is there for customers to draw upon. More excitingly, I think what's really important in Detroit pizza is the fact how different is the preparation and how different the looks are. So here we have, I just really oiled it in and used the frozen dough. I batched two dough balls together, rolled them together. So this is 240-gram dough balls, street food dough balls, Detroit dough balls from Sturdy Foods. And I've batched them together, rolled them together. I would still stretch them a little bit like a pizza. I would not be just pressing them. As you can see, that dough is super. What I was saying about Canadian flour, it's still a little bit tight. It's still pulling back a little bit, but as we can see, it's much easier to sort of put it in a tin than stretch around pizza. The stage two is to leave that to prove for 8 to 24 hours. And you can see here, it's already moist, it's bubbly, and it's got that sort of delicate structure and fabric. We cover it with olive oil, or we can leave it sort of slightly moist and under cling film. That dough, after the 8 to 24 hours, is ready to par bake. And we par bake it for around about 20 minutes, about 230, 240 degrees centigrade in a fan oven. It could be a rational oven. It doesn't have to be pizza oven. And that's another great sort of thing for hospitality operators, where they haven't got a pizza oven, they haven't got a wood-fired oven, they haven't got a deck oven. It's very easy to prepare in a rational convection oven, or be a house oven, a home oven. We want to fully bake the base. The base needs to be fully baked, needs to be caramelized, it needs to be crunchy and crispy. It will shrink a little bit, and that's where the cheese will go. So if you see at the bottom of that base, super caramelized, really lovely and crunchy. There you go. You can see some micro bubbles here, which is the effect of a longer fermentation. That gives it almost like a laminated texture, croissant, etc. That gives it a nice chew and crisp. We top the pizza with cheese first, and here I've got grated cheddar and mozzarella, feeding the sides of the wall and pressing gently the cheese into the sides of the wall, just to create that caramelized crust. Here we've got an over 380 grams of cheese per that pizza, which I would think it's 8 portions. But if I divide that pizza into 8 portions, it just seems really small. Something that I've already touched upon. We are, you know, here we really looking at half the thickness of a genuine Detroit. So I'm already adjusting it slightly to UK consumer. After we've covered the pizza base with cheese, you know, I had to go back for a little bit more because I still got some patches of dough that I didn't want to be um, sort of creating that unappealing view. We make sauce, and I make a fresh sauce. I think the pizza is pretty um, sort of opulent anyway. So I would just blend plum tomatoes with some olive oil, sauce, and the salt and pepper, and that sort of uncooked sauce just gives it a nice contrast. And we are going to be applying that sauce on the finished pizza. We're not going to be baking with that sauce. That's super important. Sizzling in the oven, 160 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes again. The thinner the pizza, the less time we need. You can see the caramelization on the edge of and the sizzling. After the pizza's finished, we then apply the sauce on a ready product. And that gives that nice contrast of freshness of the sauce and a quite sort of robustness of the pizza. Traditionally is arranged into two sort of lines that the legend goes represent the tire tracks of the Detroit Motor City, so muscle cars. So that's how the myth sort of states, and voila, we're ready to go. That's a typical Detroit margarita. Um, you can see the outer cheese wall. I think this one is better. You can see how it's sort of protruding, and obviously every American will say that the corner slice is the one to go for. Um, the texture is open. There are some open bubbles. I'm gonna just go through the par baked base. So you can see it's a sort of mixture between focaccia and a little bit of open texture, but you've got that wavy caramelized sort of texture that's giving that lightness.